Janelle smiled after the funeral. Not the warm, relieved kind. The tight, composed kind that says, "Keep it together, the cameras are on." While the entire room pretends that grief is just another storyline beat. And then, the show pivoted, right on schedule, into that so-called mature lunch. Two people in a restaurant, exchanging careful words, serving closure like it's a special of the day. Except it was never reconciliation. It was reputation management. Because the moment the conversation gets anywhere near the real questions, where has the father been? Why are the children still sidelined? Why do apologies arrive years late and still get applause? The edit conveniently looks away. So what explains that smile? Strength? Numbness? Training? Or something far more calculated? A woman who understands that in this family, the only way to survive on camera is to stay pleasant while the truth stays off screen. And once the missing pieces are named, that mature lunch stops looking mature at all. It starts looking staged. Some reality series survive on reinvention. This one survives on amnesia. The camera keeps returning to polished, grown-up conversations, as if maturity is measured by lowered voices and carefully chosen nouns, while the actual wreckage, the children, the money, the years of favoritism, the emotional and financial collateral, sits off screen like an inconvenient invoice. The latest Cody and Janelle restaurant tableau is staged like a peace summit and edited like a redemption arc, yet it lands as neither. A phony conversation built to keep everyone camera ready, with Robin positioned nearby as the ever-suffering spectator, delivering an acting performance that mistakes tremulous concern for credibility. The scene functions less as reconciliation than as content manufacturing, because the franchise is plainly clinging to any storyline that will keep it relevant while it avoids the genuinely uncomfortable subjects. The omissions are not subtle. Why was there no direct question about whether he planned to see Savannah, the child who has repeatedly been treated like an afterthought? Why was there no blunt inventory of the relationships he has wrecked, including the grandchildren he barely acknowledges? Why did a trip to North Carolina become a filmed lunch with one ex-wife rather than a meaningful effort to visit the children and grandchildren who also live there? One daughter reportedly did not even know he was in the state, which makes the family man branding feel less like a persona and more like a discontinued product. Meanwhile, Janelle's restraint is presented as dignity, when it often reads as accommodation. The pattern is familiar. She advocates for her children only when absolutely necessary, and even then, with the minimum heat required to keep the room calm. She makes it easy for him, offers him little resistance, little discomfort, little reason to reflect, then appears pleasantly surprised when he meets the lowered expectations she helped set. A man apologizing for the early years is not an achievement when the middle and later years include favoritism, financial manipulation, and a sustained refusal to treat his children as worthy of ordinary fatherhood. The subtext, however, is loud enough to rattle the tableware. Cody still reads as attracted to Janelle, and the series' attempt to frame his visit as purely reflective does not erase the unmistakable energy of a man sampling his options. Chemistry is not proof of virtue. It is simply a reminder that Cody has always been most engaged when he believes a woman will validate him. The blunt summary: he is drawn to anyone willing to sleep with him, captures the essential truth. Attention is his currency, intimacy his leverage, and connection his preferred synonym for being indulged. That context matters because the show has already let slip that Cody is not getting what he wants in his current household. Robin is now the sole partner, and a sole partner changes the economics of affection. When a wife no longer needs to compete for her position, the incentives to flatter and placate can diminish. The suggestion that Robin has turned the spigot of intimacy down or off may be speculative, but It aligns with the broader observation that Cody's mood has become more volatile as his supply narrows. He misses the environment that plural marriage provided. Multiple women, multiple mirrors, multiple opportunities to be soothed, praised, and pursued. Losing Janelle, in that context, would sting more than losing almost anyone, because she offered the combination he values most: low demand, high validation, and a relationship history he can romanticize whenever accountability appears on the horizon. The resulting speculation is predictable: flirtation at lunch, a giddy tone, and a man unusually energized by the idea of meeting her alone again, whether to discuss a headstone or to check in Wyoming, where Robin was explicitly not invited. Whether anything physical happened after filming is ultimately less important than why the rumor feels plausible. Cody is portrayed as opportunistic, and Janelle is portrayed as unusually forgiving. Still, the franchise cannot resist the bait. Production even asked Robin the kind of question designed to detonate regardless of the answer: the hypothetical of an ex-wife returning. Because nothing says healing like deliberately placing suspicion in the room and then filming the fallout as if it were a public service. The audience's appetite for that irony is also understandable. There is a particular satisfaction in imagining Robin forced to sit with her own rulebook. Janelle and Cody were still spiritually married at that point, so outrage would require admitting that marriage rules are selectively enforced when convenient. The more pointed fantasy is not that a reunion occurred, but that Robin believes it did, and torments Cody with the suspicion until he finally recognizes how corrosive his peaceful home has been. And if that sounds petty, it is only because the show has trained the audience to accept petty as the only available form of justice when real accountability is never offered. That arrangement, of course, was never a romance novel. It was a system, religious, social, financial, designed to keep women tethered, compliant, and competing for a man's approval while presenting the competition as spiritual growth. The show's most cynical trick is that it continues to package that system as personal drama rather than structural harm. Janelle's willingness to leave that restaurant smiling, while Cody makes no visible effort to repair parenting relationships, Gabe forgotten on his birthday, Savannah denied basic holiday consideration, grandchildren left unvisited, and adult children learning about his presence through omission rather than contact, reads less like closure and more like the lingering fog of conditioning. The discomfort deepens because the family is not navigating ordinary heartbreak. It is navigating loss. Janelle lost a son. Cody lost a son. The show's reluctance to engage the subject directly, how she is coping, what support exists, and what accountability is owed, reads as both cowardice and exploitation. Grief becomes scenery rather than substance. Yet the moral tension cannot be edited out. A parent can acknowledge that self-harm is a mental health crisis without pretending that relational neglect and cruelty are irrelevant to the climate in which suffering grows. The most damning part of the current softness is not that pain is complicated. It is that the series keeps skating past the fact that Cody's relationship with the son they lost was widely perceived as abusive, and that Cody has shown a consistent pattern of centering himself, even in moments that should have belonged to his children. A father who makes tragedy about his own wounded pride does not get to audition for redemption with a polite lunch and a few well-timed regrets. And yet, detours are the franchise's specialty. The show teases emotional bombshells and then replaces them with vague, therapy-adjacent language. Everything becomes an experience. The marriage experience, the party experience, the illness experience. Even grief is flattened into a consumable experience, as if vocabulary can sanitize dysfunction. Cody also overuses nuance, the way a student overuses a newly learned word, to sound thoughtful while saying nothing concrete. Safe is another favorite, repeated so often it now functions as a conversational sedative, an all-purpose term deployed to avoid blunt truths like "you behave badly" or "your presence harms people." This linguistic haze is not accidental. It is part of the show's long-running strategy of substituting atmospherics for accountability. If the series wants to pretend that the problem is merely Cody's temperament, it must ignore the most consistent pattern: Robin's role in shaping the family's hierarchy and relationships. It is time to speak plainly. Robin's behavior reads as abusive, not in the superficial sense of "she is unpleasant," but in the clinical sense of a constellation of behaviors intended to control, isolate, and extract. This does not exonerate Cody. He does not require assistance to behave badly. But treating Robin's conduct as a collection of separate irritations, lying here, meddling there, crying over everything, infantilizing her children, siphoning resources, allows the broader mechanism to stay invisible. Naming it matters because abuse is not always loud. Sometimes it is soft, tearful, and framed as fragility. Consider the ongoing narrative that Robin's children are unwanted by the original children. Whether some relationships were strained is almost beside the point. The repeated reinforcement of rejection narratives teaches children to fear connection, distrust peers, and cling to the parent who protects them from imagined hostility. Their mannerisms and anxious vigilance often look like the byproducts of emotional coercion. Children trained to monitor the room for threat. Children who appear afraid of their own shadows. Children whose attachment needs are repeatedly activated and then redirected back toward the controlling parent. Her older children already faced a complicated relationship with their biological father, including extended absences. Whatever the reasons, his choices, her interference, or a mix, the injury is real. Feeding additional abandonment narratives on top of existing scars is not just unkind, it is psychologically destabilizing. A chilling example was the scene in which a young child, newly moved into a $2 million mansion, was pushed toward distress about the sale of a bare piece of land. The content, land, development, finances, was not age-appropriate for that emotional intensity. The intensity served the adult's narrative: loss, sacrifice, unfairness. When a parent repeatedly steers a child into performing sadness, it signals that negative emotion is rewarded when it supports the parent's agenda. That is not a harmless quirk. It is an alarming form of emotional shaping. Isolation has been another consistent theme. Early seasons frequently showed Robin's household operating as a separate unit, with access controlled and integration delayed. The common assumption was that Cody created the separation, but the pattern fits Robin's incentives. Exclusivity increases leverage. There were moments when other children were sent away during dinners. Why would Gwen or Isabel be told to leave rather than simply eat with the group if the goal was family cohesion? The behavior communicates that the family is welcome only on terms that preserve Robin's dominance and her children's narrative of being separate, special, and perpetually endangered. Financial extraction has been part of this pattern as well. The show has never treated money with the seriousness it deserves, perhaps because money is where the moral accounting becomes unavoidably concrete. Robin has benefited from resources, housing, and stability in ways that align neatly with her position as the legal spouse, while others absorbed instability, relocations, and ambiguous ownership structures. Viewers are asked to care about Coyote Pass as symbol, while being discouraged from asking who paid for what, who holds title, and who will walk away protected. One of the most revealing arcs in this power shift was the legal divorce that enabled Cody to marry Robin and adopt Robin's children. Mary was praised for sacrificing her legal status, as though relinquishing rights is the same as demonstrating love. In reality, that divorce removed leverage and made it easier for Cody to treat Mary as expendable while she had fewer protections. In many countries, long-term marriage would have produced concrete entitlements: spousal support tied to income, child support tied to age, and pension sharing proportionate to years married, none of which care about tearful speeches or spiritual labels. The adoption itself remains adult-centered theater. The children's visible reactions, shock, confusion, subdued distress, did not match the later claim that they were constantly begging to be adopted. Dayton's discomfort, including his admission that it was confusing, suggested a loyalty conflict and grief, not relief. Brianna's confusion looked less like celebration and more like being blindsided. Aurora offered the response that aligned with expectations, which is precisely what happens when a child learns that emotional compliance keeps the room calm. Filming the moment was especially grim. Even if adoption were legally appropriate, being told that a biological parent has effectively been removed is a loss, not a party. And the adult's apparent failure to center the children's emotional reality was one of the show's most blatant displays of selfishness. The manipulation around adoption was reinforced by an earlier dynamic: Robin pushing her children to call Cody Daddy from the start. Titles carry emotional weight. Encouraging immediate paternal labeling before attachment is established is not bonding. It is rebranding. It teaches children to perform intimacy on demand and treats emotional bonds as interchangeable, subject to adult preference. None of this would matter as much if the series were honest about Cody's agency. But the show still flirts with the idea that he was once a harmless leader who became mean only after Robin. The record suggests otherwise. The difference is not that cruelty began. It is that cruelty became harder to hide. Early harm was often delivered with charm and edited with care. There were always tells: public humiliations masked as jokes, contempt disguised as honesty, and punishment delivered through neglect. His cruelty toward Mary is not a late-season development. It has deep roots, and the idea that a friendly producer relationship might have protected his image for years is less conspiracy than basic media literacy. Still, recent footage has shown a noteworthy shift in his presentation, and it is instructive. In a restaurant scene, Cody appeared fidgety, anxious, and eager to earn Robin's approval, as though a single nod could steady him. It resembled appeasement. Observing that dynamic does not absolve him. It contextualizes why his insecurity intensifies his cruelty. In some abusive systems, the person who lashes out at others is also desperately seeking approval from the person who controls the emotional thermostat, and the spillover lands on everyone else. Janelle's position is therefore both sympathetic and exasperating. She is frequently treated as the rational one, but rationality is not the same as health. Detachment can be a coping strategy, and in high-demand religious environments, detachment is often mistaken for virtue. Over time, avoidance becomes identity. The logical wife who does not need too much, does not demand too much, and therefore feels superior to women who do. That identity can look mature, especially beside more overt emotional expression, but it can also function as a shield against doing the work that real freedom requires. Naming harm plainly, grieving it honestly, and refusing to preserve a man's ego at the expense of children's well-being. Conditioning matters. Janelle was not raised in the faith in the same way, but she still chose to join it after a divorce, with a conviction that suggests contrarianism and avoidance. Growing up adjacent to a culture with sexual stigma can make a married man's attention feel like destiny rather than dysfunction. and religious framing can launder desire into calling. A low-commitment partner who appears charming, physically attractive, and intermittently attentive can be unusually appealing to someone who has not had many romantic reference points, especially when the system tells her that enduring male inconsistency is a virtue. The latest episode sharpened this critique because it was not merely soft, it was selectively soft. Janelle's delight in a narrow apology about early years, without demanding acknowledgement of favoritism, financial abuse, or ongoing neglect, makes it look as though the bar for Cody is still underground. The show portrays her as making it easy for him, but the ease has a cost. It signals to children that their pain is negotiable, and it signals to Cody that minimal effort earns maximum grace. That dynamic also fuels the blunt prediction that if Robin disappeared tomorrow, Janelle would be at Cody's door tomorrow night. The point is not the literal forecast, but the lingering gravitational pull of being chosen by the man the system crowned. Janelle is also the one who, even now, seems to have done the least psychological excavation. Christine has been openly naming the discrepancy between the marriage story she was sold and the marriage reality she endured. Mary has been forced, slowly and painfully, to admit that loyalty was exploited as a resource. Janelle, by contrast, keeps returning to the refrain that the relationship was great until the recent break, as if years of emotional neglect, periodic abandonment, and financial manipulation were minor weather events rather than a climate. The avoidance is often misread as security. In practice, it looks like emotional shutdown, the kind that can be mistaken for wisdom until a crisis exposes how little has been processed. The culture that shaped these women taught them that worth is tied to partnership and male approval. Janelle's giddiness at a partial apology reads less like healing and more like the old script still running in the background. The critique extends beyond romance into competence. Janelle has made questionable financial decisions in pursuit of harmony, and harmony in this family has often meant capitulation to Cody's whims. The move to Flagstaff had clear negative impacts on children, including Gabe, and the logical spouse should have been the first to resist destabilizing choices. She has often insisted Cody was a great father when the children were younger. The record increasingly contradicts that, including moments of obvious neglect that cannot be defended as busy or misunderstood. Personal history likely matters. Observations about Janelle's self-consciousness regarding weight, her reliance on logic as identity, and her similarity to her mother, another woman who married a misogynistic man while presenting herself as rational and detached, suggests that the pattern predates Cody. Curiosity about her early family dynamics is not gossip. It is analysis. If fathering was absent or low quality in earlier life, it can normalize low standards for men and make neglect feel familiar rather than unacceptable. The nacho humiliation remains a telling moment. Cody publicly mocked Christine with a story designed to demean her, and Janelle's visible reaction, smiling beside him, registered as alignment with the man rather than solidarity with the woman. In polygamous systems, women learn to survive by not challenging the man because the man controls resources and status. The cost is that other women become collateral. None of this negates the fact that Janelle's grief deserves respect. The observation that she appears to be functioning remarkably well after losing a child is astonishment at human endurance. But resilience cannot become an excuse to ignore misalignment. Grief can make people vulnerable to familiar dynamics, including retreating into the comfort of old patterns. That vulnerability is precisely why the show's timing feels predatory. It places Janelle in a scene where she is asked, implicitly, to rehabilitate Cody's image, while the children's pain remains an inconvenient subplot. The series adds another layer of frustration through inconsistency. One week, Janelle expresses hatred. The next, she gushes. One moment, Christine describes Cody as a great man who could socialize with her new husband. The next, she insists she never wants to see him and cannot trust him. Then the show teases the spectacle of Cody and David racing cars, as though horsepower will resolve a decade of parental neglect. The whiplash is not character depth. It is storytelling manipulation, a cheap way to stretch thin material across episodes while the substantive questions remain untouched. Christine's narrative, when not being toyed with by production, is the clearest demonstration of what Cody actually lost. She was the family's social adhesive, the planner, the energy, the person who made family feel like more than a schedule. People who have lived in large families recognize the role immediately. The organizer who creates traditions, anticipates needs, and makes labor look effortless. Even a brief public encounter, seeing Christine and David in an airport, hearing her recognizable voice before seeing her, noticing an effortless outfit and ordinary kindness to staff, underscores the same point the show spent years denying. She carries warmth naturally, and that warmth was the infrastructure. This is why his meltdown when Christine left was so intense. He had spent years belittling her and signaling he did not value her, even while relying on her centrality. He likely assumed she would endure indefinitely, especially given her upbringing in the faith. When she left, it punctured his control narrative. It also revealed a competitive undercurrent, a contest of influence and identity that Christine won by refusing to play anymore. His ongoing fixation on her departure, even when Mary and Janelle were trying to articulate their own reasons for leaving, suggested that Christine's exit bruised him most. Not because of love, but because she exposed how replaceable his authority actually was. Cody's public criticisms of Christine's body and his repeated recounting of being grossed out never made sense on their own terms. His standards were inconsistent across wives. The contempt reads as weaponization, jealousy of her social capital, discomfort with her community status, and resentment that she represented a kind of goodness he could not manufacture. Rather than celebrate the workhorse who kept the home fires burning, he tried to diminish her, and then acted shocked when the diminished person declined to stay. Mary's story further underscores how cult conditioning traps people in empty marriages. It is not impossible to believe she stayed. It is predictable. A high-demand group teaches women that salvation is tied to enduring marriage, that suffering is sanctifying, and that emotional neglect is normal. When a woman is raised in that framework, she may interpret abandonment as duty. Deprogramming is slow. It requires not only leaving a man, but dismantling an entire cosmology that treats women's needs as irrelevant and their endurance as holy. Robin's interference in Mary's autonomy was visible in moments like the conversation about Mary wanting to go to school. It was presented as concern about family unity, but functioned as control, discouraging growth that could produce independence. Mary's eventual realization that she was being used, by Cody and by Robin, was accelerated by the pandemic era, which stripped away the performance and displayed the one-sided nature of the relationships. Support from friends who refused to let her keep accepting mistreatment became a lifeline precisely because the system itself had trained her to accept crumbs as feasts. The show, meanwhile, continues to dodge substantive topics that would make it meaningful again. Viewers do not need another loop about whether Janelle will date or whether any wife will reconsider polygamy. The plural marriage was the premise, and it has failed. What remains is aftermath. Finances, employment, property, legal entanglements, and the practical work of repairing, or acknowledging the impossibility of repairing, parent-child relationships. Those are the hard issues. They are also the only ones worth the audience's time. Even side content underscores the disconnect. It arrived via an online interview hosted by Melanie and Corey on the channel Notes to Self 444. And the most striking element was not any single revelation, but the simple fact that the hosts understood the religious subculture well enough to ask questions without turning polygamy into a carnival sideshow. Some listeners will complain that the hosts spoke too much. Others will notice that a conversational format can yield more clarity than the show's heavily produced confessionals. Mykelti and Tony came across less defensive than in many prior appearances, which made the details more credible. Tony's goofy humor paired with real fluency in religious framing, and the casual disclosure that the grandchildren call Robin Boppy. Mykelti also described, with unusual bluntness, how the family effectively raised different cohorts under different rulebooks, to the point that the older children, the middle children, and the younger children, including Robin's older daughters, experienced different parents in practice, with different norms, different expectations, and different boundaries. She also described earlier strict modesty enforcement, contrasted with later softness, and spoke of Robin as sweet and kind to her and her children, a detail that does not erase broader patterns, but does highlight how selectively warmth can be distributed in a hierarchy. The small detail that lands hardest is that even in casual listing, Mykelti does not always naturally include Robin among the mothers, a slip that speaks louder than any confessional. It also fuels a legitimate question. After memorial-related ruptures and public statements, what is the actual state of contact between adult children and Cody and Robin? If relationships are being rebuilt, fine. If they are being rebuilt without truth-telling, the rebuild becomes another performance. And the show's favoritism toward soft storytelling virtually guarantees that performance will be sold as progress. There is also a fantasy many viewers share that the series should finally require the one person most protected by the edit to face consequence. A Robin apology tour. Not a tearful monologue in a confessional, but a literal tour. Pack up the dolls and the questionable art, climb onto a bus, and drive across the country, apologizing to the original wives and the children for the harm done. The predictable punchline is that such a tour would end with Robin crying until everyone apologized to her, which is precisely why the fantasy persists. Even imaginary accountability is more satisfying than the real show's refusal to attempt it. The editorial conclusion is simple. The problem is not that the adults are messy. It is that the series keeps confusing mess with meaning. A man apologizing for the early years while continuing to neglect his children is not growth. It is public relations. A woman smiling through that apology without centering her children is not empowerment. It is conditioning. A legal spouse performing fragility while practicing control is not misunderstood. It is dangerous. And a production team substituting buzzwords, flirtation, and staged lunches for the gritty work of accountability is not documenting reality. It is designing distraction and calling it an experience. If this series insists on one more season, the obligation is clear. Stop treating the audience like interns in a feelings workshop. Ask where the money went, who owns what, and why. Ask why a father can fly for a lunch scene, but not for his children. Demand names, dates, receipts. Anything else is not storytelling. It is avoidance with lighting. And stop awarding apologies for arriving late. Subscribe.